Hi, I'm Tom with Evolution Industries, and I'm going to walk you through our valve plate manual. We will make a check socket and a definitive socket with the VMP007 valve plate from Evolution. From there, you will be able to install any one of our component configurations. And now we will fabricate a definitive socket using Evolution's VMP007 valve plate. Here are some of the tools that we will be using to fabricate this socket. A drill with a 1/8 inch drill bit, a torch and silicone pad, 4mm wrench, plumber's putty, a valve housing dummy, a lamination plate or puck, synthetic grease, 60 to 80 grit sandpaper, our WT001 wrench tool, sharps shears, our Evo bond available here at Evolution, and our VMP007 valve plate. The first step in fabricating our definitive socket is preparing our check socket. And if you followed the previous video or our valve manual for section 1, your check socket will be mounted on a VMP001 and wrapped in Scotch cast as such. The first thing you want to do is remove the 4 20mm set screws, and we are going to change out the duckbill valve or seal washer and housing and replace it with the dummy. We do this to ensure that when we fill it with plaster, the duckbill or seal are not filled with plaster. Turn it counterclockwise to release the housing, and everything simply pops out together. And replace it. You don't have to worry about lubricating it at this time. We're just using it as a spacer. Turn it clockwise and then tighten it down. We can replace our adapter with the set screws. And on the inside of the socket, where you previously drilled through for the expulsion valve, you want to use some plumber's putty or something similar, and you want to seal that hole up so your plaster does not leak. Return the check socket to the alignment jig. And then we will pour our plaster to capture the alignment. Once your plaster is set, you can remove the check socket from the alignment jig. You want to loosen only 2 screws to keep your alignment. And then you'll remove your check socket from your plaster mold. If it's contoured nice enough, sometimes you can use an air hose and just pop it off. And then you just want to smooth your cast up so you have a nice clean surface. And then we will go over to the vacuum jig and pull our 1/8 inch PETG. Once you have your cast clean and smooth, we're over at the vacuum jig. You want to elevate it off your vacuum plate. We use a 2-inch metal collar. You can use PVC, anything that will resist the heat of the plastic. and you elevate it off the plate. That way, if you start to get any wrinkles, you can sweep them down underneath, giving you a nice flat surface. So we heat our 1/8 inch PETG at 375 degrees Fahrenheit. I will heat it for 1.5 minutes, turn it over for 1 minute, and temperature and times may vary depending on which oven you use. After 1.5 minutes, I'm simply going to flip it. And after 1 more minute, it will be ready to pull. Plastic is ready to pull. I will turn it over as I pull it onto the cast. And I'll give it about a 90-degree turn, and that'll help eliminate any wrinkles as well. Sweep the plastic down. And I let that cool for approximately 1 minute. Once your plastic is cool, you can use a sharp razor knife and cut it around the base. Couple little taps will release the collar, and then we'll go over to the bench where we will trim the excess off and heat and flatten the plastic. Using a sharp pair of shears, we're going to trim the PETG, leaving about 2 inches remaining that we will heat and fold down, and that will seal the top of the cast from any resin reaching the plaster. You can use a torch and a silicone pad. Soften the plastic. Then you can simply fold it down. And this replaces your inner PVA bag. Next thing you want to do, using your 60 to 80 grit sandpaper, you want to rough up the entire surface, paying special attention to the proximal trim line. If it's not roughed up enough around the trim line, there's a chance that it could delaminate. And now we can put it back into the jig, and we will Evo bond our VMP 007 valve plate. Now we are ready to prep our VMP 007 valve plate. And to do that, we get our valve lamination dummy, some of our synthetic grease, and we lubricate the threads. And you want to use synthetic grease opposed to petroleum jelly or Vaseline, because those items can actually act as a wick for your resin or Evo bond. So you want to screw it in clockwise. Tighten it down with the wrench tool so it's nice and flat with the bottom surface of the plate, the labeled surface. We add our pyramid and 4 set screws. And on the back side of the plate, we'll first fill the center hole of the valve dummy with some plumber's putty, making a nice flat surface. and then we will cover the back side of all 4 screws. We will reinsert it into the alignment jig, and because we only loosened 2 screws previously, we maintain our alignment. And before we add our Evo bond, you can double check your height. If it seems like there's more than a 1/4 inch space above the plate, that's okay, because when we did our check socket, there was a little additional thickness to the plastic, but this will maintain the height. And you want to use a little bit more of our synthetic grease and just put it on the top surface of the dummy there, and that will help it release from the Evo bond upon removal. So first we fill in around the housing. Make sure it gets into the threads good. Cover the housing, and then we cover all 4 screw holes, and that also blocks it from the resin during lamination. And create a nice level of Evo bond there. Swing our mold back over and drop it straight down, and we allow that to set for about 2 minutes. And once the Evo bond is fully cured, we can remove it from the alignment jig one more time. And we will prepare it for our lamination. To prepare it, all we do is simply remove the pyramid. With our lamination dummy, just use the same 4 set screws. And then you want to make sure that you screw them in, and that will prevent any resin leaking in underneath. Use a little bit more of your plumber's putty. You don't have to cover the entire screw, you just want to put some in the hole in the screw head. And we are ready for lamination. Okay, the first thing we want to do is we're going to wet our PVA bag. That way by the time we're done our layup, it'll be nice and soft and ready to pull over. It's a fairly small cast, so I'm going to use an 8-inch PVA bag. Now that we're ready to laminate, here at Evolution, our layup is 2 carbon, 2 fiberglass, and 2 stockinette. So for a carbon finish, we use 1 piece of carbon, double the length of the mold. We tie it into the groove of the plate, and then also underneath the plate on this first layer of carbon only, and that will secure the plate into place and also prevent any chance of it pushing up through the distal of the socket. Then we use 1 piece of fiberglass, double the length of the mold, slide it over the carbon, And similar to the first time, we tie it into the groove of the plate only. And then our nylon. Same thing, double the length. That goes over the fiberglass. Make sure it's pulled nice and tight. Tie it into the groove of the plate. And then one by one, we reflect each layer down. And carbon winds up on the outside, which will give us a nice carbon finish. And our PVA bag should be ready. So for the carbon finish, before I pull it over, I will invert the PVA bag to give a nice glossy shine to it. Want to make sure we secure the PVA bag to whatever type of funnel we use to prevent any leakage of the resin. And since this is a transtibial, we will put the seam up the posterior. And you may notice we don't use any feather stretch or other thin nylon on the outside. It does make it a little more difficult pulling the PVA bag down, but it gives it a much crisper look to the carbon fiber. And you want to pull it down until it's nice and snug around that lamination dummy. Once it's nice and tight around there, you tape it around at the bottom. You don't have to worry about tying off the top because it creates a nice natural seal. And you can see it clearly pull in. Here at Evolution, we use an epoxyacryl resin. So for a carbon fiber finish, we'll use our resin and just a small dab of black pigment. And with the cream hardener, now with the black pigment, you have to be a little careful because it will accelerate the setting time. And we'll mix it up and pour it in. You want to make sure you scrape the sides and the bottom, but be careful not to puncture through the bottom of the cup. And just make sure that cream hardener is well mixed into it. Now, as you can see, we still have our seal around the lamination dummy. So if you just squeeze a little bit down through, And just let it slowly soak in at a time, and that'll help avoid getting any air trapped below the plate. You can also massage any air bubbles that you may suspect be there. And then you can start drawing it down with a string. Once you feel you have your socket well saturated, you can use some vinyl tape, and we will wrap around the lamination dummy, and that will also give us a nice clean edge on the edge of our plate. And then we'll let that stand for about 10 to 15 minutes to set. Now once the lamination is completely set, you can remove your PVA bag. And when you remove it from the proximal, you can remove the excess resin and have access to the screws to remove lamination dummy. And now we can remove our lamination dummy. And if you have any resin at all that might seep through, you can just use a razor blade and just shave it off. You have a nice clean surface. And you want to use your drill with the 1/8 inch bit, go through the center hole and drill until you hit the plaster. Then you can cut your socket off, trim and smooth it up. Remove the valve dummy. And then you are ready to use any configuration that is suitable for your patient. This socket is now ready for any valve system configuration, which you can find a guide in your starter kit or on our website at www.evoii.com.